This is Warren Vanderhill with the Center for Middletown Studies project on school consolidation in Muncie, Indiana. Today I'm interviewing Michael Long, a member of the Muncie Community Schools School Board. It's November 3rd, 2014. I want to begin, Mike, by thanking you for taking the time to participate in our project. I want to begin with maybe a little bit of a historical question, and that is when you became a member of the school board. I've heard a lot of people talk about the report of the Blue Ribbon Task Force on the future of the schools in Muncie, and I'd like you to comment on what importance that report was on what later led to the decision to close Southside.
Well, I just come on the board in 2008. We did the Blue Ribbon Task Force 2009, 2010. And I sat in on that committee maybe twice. Tom Parker and Mike Gorin were board members then, and they only had two on that. And a couple times Tom Parker couldn't make it, so I sat on there. And it was just a gathering of people throughout the community who were looking at not only just our schools and the possibilities of our schools, but our community at large, and see what what we could do to help better our education. And some of that meant the possibility of closing schools because we know of the decline in enrollment, and also with industry leaving. So it was a lot of things that came out of that. A lot of input. It was teachers, it was administrators, it was community members. So people from all factions of Muncie kind of chimed in on that. And so we looked at that report and kind of weighed in on some of the things that we thought. We saw that the enrollment was declining. And so at that particular time, because we knew how vital Southside was to the south side of Muncie, and all you had to do was really to ride in a Southside homecoming parade to really get the value of it. I don't think people understand the value of what Southside meant to that side of town. And so, our thing was, we knew that sooner or later, if the enrollment kept going down, it would be inevitable to maybe close Southside or close Central, just as Northside was. But our goal was try to keep it open as long as possible to see if somehow there might be some type of upswing, in the economy. And so we looked at those things and we weighed in on those things and tried to decipher, what did that really mean. And so sometimes we hoped that the trends that we were seeing, sometimes we hoped that it wasn't true, yeah. and it ended up being true. And that with the enrollment declining and people leaving Muncie, so it showed us some things that possibly we needed to do. And so, but our goal was to keep Southside open as long as possible because of what it meant to the South Side. But as we got going, it was over 1,000 in both schools then. And then while being on the board, it went down to 900s and then under 900, and both schools became 3A schools, instead of 4A schools. And so we could see. Yeah. Then we started looking at a number. We started tossing around in our head. When I went to Muncie Central, we probably had 1,900 students in there. They had open concept. But then we saw both schools getting close to 1,700. And that kind of set up a flag that, we need to start considering something. Because
1,700 or 700? Total,
the total in both schools was about 1,700. Right. And we figured that Central could hold 1,600, 1,700, 1,800. So, it's like, one of the things that I think before I got on the board, was the new renovation of Southside. Yeah. And about $23 million went into that project. So you just didn't want that to go away. So you tried to keep that as long as possible. But the numbers just start going down. And when you could take, two groups of people and put them in one building, then, it kind of made sense. So, the Blue Ribbon Task Force, helped us start seeing some things. And then when those figures start bearing true and they start getting close to that line, kind of in our mind, it was like a 1,700 student, thing that was kind of stuck in our mind. Okay. In my mind, at least. I can't speak for the other board members, but when we got close to that number, we need to really start taking a hard look at possibility.
So what really happened, I'm talking now about more recently, with the school board was what somebody from outside Muncie would say, you were just dealing with a fiscal reality, that you really didn't have a lot of choice.
Exactly. We didn't have a lot of choice. And then when we went in and started doing the town hall meetings, trying to get community input, there was a lot of different things. We had a lot of option A through G or something like. We had a lot of options on the table, that we kind of wrestled with. A lot of those was from the Blue Ribbon Task Force, some of the things that they had said. And then, you know, we also looked at the possibility of going 7 through 12.
Yeah, I was
two
gonna
buildings
ask you about
to
that.
keep going in those 7 through 12.
Yeah.
My wife is from East Chicago. They did 7 through 12. Me personally, you know, it was difficult for me to go with a 7 through 12. They really had to sell me on that. You know, I was, you know, in my mind, I said, we can't do that. But, you know, they almost had to sell me on that to get it. And I did really, the numbers I saw really didn't bear that we could really do that. And then after they really took a hard look at it, and said Southside really couldn't support a 7 through 12, you know, in terms
The
of numbers.
population's too big?
Yeah, the population was too big, but also in terms of, but you got to understand where classrooms go, you know, where the core classes go, and then when you got your elective classes and all that stuff go, you know, where will they fit? And then you talk about, you might get those students in there, but when you talk about times of day at the 8 o'clock class, you know, where would each student be? And at 9 o'clock and at 10 o'clock, so each class, where would students be? And, you know, and you couldn't really fit those students into that, you know, with special ed, with the elective classes. It just didn't seem to fit as what they showed us. So, and that could fit in Central with the high, so we decided to do that and just keep 2 middle schools.
Okay. Would you say that 7-12 was the most viable alternative compared to, say, some other possible alternatives?
To keep both high schools open, to keep both buildings and both identities, probably 7 through 12. You might have went 7 through 12, but then you had to also deal with, if you do 7 through 12, then you have to deal with, okay, what are you going to do with the 6th grade? Move them back to the elementary schools. Well, the elementaries had already made the adjustment of you know, being without those 6th graders. Now, they probably could have taken them in, but that would have been another adjustment in those elementary schools. Okay, now we got this, now we got to bring 6th graders back. How do you do that? All of that kind of stuff. And so with the testing and you know, getting in the I-STEP and the testing and also all of that kind of stuff just didn't kind of, bringing them back to the elementary schools just wasn't educationally sound, that we found out in terms of testing, in terms of the progress we wanted to go. But so people think, well, 7 through 12, we probably could do that, but then they didn't consider, I don't think, or had on the table bringing 6th graders back. So when you're in a town hall meeting and you're throwing out these things, people see a sheet of paper or 2 sheets of paper or a stack of paper, 10 or 12 sheets, and they're looking at through the stuff. That's just general information. They don't understand we got stacks and stacks of stuff that we have to go through. And so they may say, well, you can do this and this, but then on this side we could say, you could do that, but here's the reasons why we can't. And so that was what kind of puts us in the bind.
Let me ask you about some groups that might have or might not have played a role in trying to influence this decision. What role, if any, did the local business community play in any of these deliberations?
Well, we used the business in terms of, there were business people on the Blue Ribbon Task Force. And so, they played a role in that. Other than that, in terms of the final decision, like I said, when we came up with the different, or the administration team came up with the different scenarios, A through B, C, D, and all those kind of stuff, they kind of drew from the Blue Ribbon Task Force and some other things. In terms of business, other than being part of the Blue Ribbon Task Force and having some input there, I don't know if there was much of that. There were people who represented the city of Muncie. So there was a given input on the Blue Ribbon Task Force. But I think we kind of pulled from those things, and as we went through the town hall meetings, unless they got up, at the town hall meeting and voiced opinion. They might have had some interaction. I know the city of Muncie, the mayor, they were concerned about closing the South Side, and so they weighed in on some things like that. Okay. Business on the South Side is how I'm saying, if we lose South Side, we'll lose part of our business, and so there were some weigh-ins that way. Okay. Try to get some feedback on those.
So there wasn't any specific position taken by the Chamber of Commerce that tried to influence school board members?
No, I think Jay Julian, I think he was part of that Blue Ribbon Task Force or a member of the chamber. So just kind of a general, thing in the Blue Ribbon Task Force of giving us kind of insight how we'll deal with business. But I don't know if we really reached out to the business to say how would this necessarily impact, but we would get, inklings of it from, what they would share in the Blue Ribbon Task Force.
Let me go off on a little bit of a tangent and ask you, when you think of the economic development of the future of Muncie, do you think that the business community ought to play a more active role in what the schools are like?
I think the business ought to play a more active role in that because of the fact of, because ideally, my thought is ideally that because these students are going to be your future employees, And so, so I think they ought to play a big role. I think that Ball State University should play a bigger role in our schools. We house a lot of, not house necessarily, but we take in a lot of their student teachers.
Sure.
And here, I think they should have and it's difficult because they got a budget like we got a budget. They got to be fiscally sound like we do. But I would like to see even a greater partnership there, because hopefully not only will, from the business point of view, these will be future employees, but these should be future, Ball State students. But I think they should have that because have some ownership, some buy-in. I know that there are some partnerships with the Muncie Area Career Center, with the welding class, the electronics class, the biomed class. Some of our business are taking those in as interns and stuff like that. So that helps a lot in there. But now we're finding out that I think, before property tax caps and all this kind of stuff, I think, Muncie Community Schools was here, Ball Hospital was here, Ball State, other business was here. But now the pot of money is getting smaller and smaller, and we realize that we have more in common than we think. And so now we have to try to pull together to save some of those resources.
Was there any kind of direct or indirect political pressure from, say, political parties or political groups in town to try to influence the decision that you as board members ultimately had to make?
Not with me, not at all. I can't speak for the other board. I didn't have that at all. I didn't have any political pull. Like I said, I grew up in Muncie. I'm the only one member on the board then that grew up in Muncie, went to Muncie Community Schools, graduated from Muncie Community School. I'm the only one on the board that has kids in Muncie Community Schools even right now. So I look at it a whole different perspective than they did. So a political thing couldn't influence me anyway, because I lived this thing. I mean, I've been a part. I walked in the hallways of these schools.
Yeah.
I have kids in the hallways of these schools. So political, I've been in Muncie too long for that to handle it. But
How about the teachers union? Did they play any role in this?
they had members on the Blue Ribbon Task Force. In terms of, we asked, different groups, different schools and different groups to weigh in on that, and they gave us, each school building gave us different things. I think, I'm not sure if the teachers union specifically gave us input, but each school gave us input in terms of cost cutting. What do they think about the merger, those kind of things? So we got some input from different areas. I don't know if there was a specific one that Pat Kennedy, president would say this is the union's position or perspective. They knew we had a difficult task. They knew, they're in the classroom. They know that the enrollment is declining. They know that we maybe had 550 teachers this year. Next year we only have 520. So they know this is going down. So they knew we had a real dilemma going on. So.
Well, as somebody who really has kids in the school, you're the person to ask this question. What do you think having a single high school says about Muncie's educational future?
Well, I think let's see. I think we afford our students a great opportunity. If you make one high school the cream of the crop, if you make it the top notch, it doesn't matter if it's one high school, two high schools, three high schools. It's what we put in it. We have to make sure that we give our kids the best education possible. We have to offer them offerings that they can get nowhere else. We have to go outside of the box. We have to be par excellent in everything we do. So the number of schools, two high schools, three high schools, you got, different valedictorians, you got different things, but the course offerings, there were classes that we were offering at Central and courses we were offering at Southside that may had, our cut line is 15 students per class. Well, they get in there, if you might have fourth year German or third year Japanese,
right,
and might have 10 in this class and 10 in this class. Well, 10 at Southside and 10 at Central. Well, realistically, because it was under 15, we shouldn't offer that class. But because, but now with merging them, then we can offer that class with the same rigor, but also you got the number of students that you need to be able to do what you need to do. So we have to get better at it. There were some unique things at Southside that Central didn't offer. There's some unique things at Central that Southside didn't offer. And we have to bring both of those together to make those fit. One of the things, like I said, I refer back to the Southside Homecoming Parade. It was par excellence, second to none. Well, when we merged, Mr. Jarvis, principal at Central, he reached out and said, okay, your parade was better than ours. How can we improve that? The senior breakfast at Southside was par excellent. Central's was just kind of, so
Yeah.
now they're going to say, okay, what made you that good? So what we have to do across the board, not just with a homecoming parade or senior breakfast, we got to say, okay, what was unique about Southside that gave it the quality? What was unique about Central that made it par excellent? Let's bring those together and say, let's give the best in this one school, the best of Southside and the best of Central to make the best school. And then we keep going. I asked my daughter last night, I said, as we was driving home, I said, now, you know, she's a junior in Muncie Central. I said, okay, you've been there, you know, about 4 months. I said, you know, because everybody's thinking about the bullying, the fights and all that kind of stuff. So I said, well, you know, what's going on? She said, Dad, you know, we don't care. Don't nobody care if you went to Southside. If they're still wearing a red Southside, it doesn't bother us. We don't care like that. The community care. She said, but I don't believe there's been some skirmishes in there. There have been some other things. She said, but I don't believe I know there was a fight between a Central and a Southside player because a Central Southside student because one was from Central and one from Southside. He said, we just don't care about that. We ready, you know, I'm about business. I got to go to school. We got to go to school. So if we make the school the best and offer the best, and take the uniqueness of both of it. I think that's what they try to do when they merged North Side to make the best of that. And now we got, you know, 3 identities really. We got North Side, South Side, and Central. If we bring all of those and offer the best of those buildings in that building, you still got a quality education.
Well, the reason I was smiling,
Okay.
you're a football player.
Yes.
Football is football.
Mm-hmm.
And once you start putting on the same shirt as the other guy, it's the same thing.
Yes.
So I don't think there's been any dissension as far as football players are
Right.
concerned,
Yeah.
or will be with basketball
Right,
players,
exactly.
or volleyball players, or anything else.
Yeah.
What do you think having a single high school says about Muncie's economic future?
Huh. Well, when you, like we were talking before, when you talk about at one time you had 19,000 students in school and now you got under 6,000. That says a lot, just that. It says that, you know, in 1970, 69, 70, 70, 71, whatever it was, we were the first 9th grade class into the high school. And that's when Northside first opened. So we had 3 high schools. And so it's like Muncie was thriving, Muncie was booming, you know, with the Borg Warners and the Chevrolets and all of those kind of things. But now to go from 3, when we think we're thriving, to go down to 1, it says a lot about economics. It says, you know, what happened to go from 3 high schools to 1 high school. And one thing you have to understand is that this is not the only community that's going through that pressure. Anderson did it, you know, several years ago, and they may have it might have happened faster there, or they may have woken up to the fact sooner than we did that, you know, we might need to go. And it leaves hurt feelings and it leaves that. But it says a lot about something's going on in our community when you can have 3 thriving high schools and go down now to 1, and you're housing, you know, 1,600 students in 1, where you probably had, you know, or twice that, almost 3 times that in 3 different high schools. So it says that something is going on in Muncie, you know, economically that's causing.
This is the question I can only ask somebody who's a former athlete at Central. Do you think it's important for a high school to be back in 4A rather than play in 3A in the state of Indiana?
You know, I like, when I came through, there was no class.
Right.
I like the old school, no class.
Yeah,
you
me too.
just go there.
I agree with you.
And so I like that. I don't know. I don't know if it's, you know, I think each class is unique. I think it affords, you know, what I couldn't see, I think it affords teams to be able to, who would, like a Westdale now is going to the state championship in volleyball.
Yeah.
Well, you know, if it was one class, they probably would never get there, possibly.
Right.
You know,
Well, they
that
would.
possibility. You see Wapahani won the state championship in baseball. With one class, that might not have happened. You know, and so, but you have some unique situations like a Burris, who would win state championships no matter with one's class. So it's just a matter of how you do that. But I would like to see us, you know, in a higher class, but, you know, numbers bear out. You know, one thing I'm finding out that's kind of sad to me is that we don't, even with 1,600 students, I don't know if we have really the numbers. My daughter plays soccer. Last year, before the merger, they had about 22 teammates on the soccer team. They didn't have enough to do a JV. This year, they had about 22 with the merger. So, you know, I don't know if it really translates, you know, in terms of, you know, you think, well, you're double, everything double, football doubles, basketball doubles, baseball doubles. But one thing, you know, so going to another class, you know, it does, you know, yeah, man, it doesn't bother me in terms of, I like to see us go back to 4A, which, this year we're in 3A because they're doing it in a 2-year cycle, so it'll go back, we'll go back next year based on numbers, but I don't know if kids are not necessarily as interested, it doesn't seem. They have other interests now than we did. When we went to school and you played sports. That's all we did. But there's so much now, and there wasn't AAU when we came up. There wasn't club ball and all that. You just played for your school. You didn't think about it or anything else. So I don't know. I like to see it go back to the old way. It's not going to go back, but the thing is, but it afforded a lot of schools who probably wouldn't taste a sectional championship to experience that, a regional championship to experience that. When you're at Muncie Central and you used to win it all the time, you don't think about other schools.
Yeah, for the small schools then, if you won the sectional, it was like winning the state championship.
Exactly.
Red Key or something like that. You beat Muncie Central.
Yeah, I remember in 1972
Yeah.
when Yorktown,
Yeah,
Bruce Parkinson beat Central, and Central had a tough team. And I mean, it was like the next day at Muncie Central was like a morgue.
Yeah.
I mean, it was just, but that happened very rarely though.
Some school board members are on record as saying that some local realtors are quite critical of the Muncie schools and in some cases steer prospective home buyers away from the community schools. What's your view of that?
Well, I've heard that, since I've come on the board. I'm in my 6th year now. I've heard that. I was assured by realtors that that's not happening. So they specifically said that's not happening. But to be honest, I don't know what they're saying. I know a lot of people come in and you see, enrollment, maybe out of Yorktown, out of Cowan, out of Delta is growing, maybe possibly. So I don't know there. But the thing is, when you look at a realtor and you're selling houses, and people are coming from a Fishers area or they're coming from somewhere and they're looking, they may have a certain standard of house they want. Well, I know good what I know they're not coming in the inner city of Muncie to buy a house because the urban blight is just horrible. So the thing is then where are they buying a house? Where are they offering a house? What kind of house do they want? And so they may say, you can have this house, but this is a better house, and it just happened to be in the Yorktown district, and they have better schools, they have A schools, they have, So they may say that, so I've heard that, but we were kind of assured, and when I came on the board, one of our board members was a realtor, and he said that can happen at times. Some people can say that and steer that. It's just up to the individual, but so it has happened. But I would hope, people can.
What long-term effect do you think having a single high school will have on Muncie's sense of community?
Well, I think it's going to, to bring the community back. This theme of One Muncie has been a big slogan. I think the biggest thing that helped was one of the first things that they merged was the bands, and then you go to be able to go down to the state fair and to see them win, and so that showed, wow, this is something, and for that to be the first thing even before the school doors opened was monumental to Muncie. So I think there are still, even though there are a lot of South Side and a lot of North Side, a lot of those, maybe not those parents, but grandparents, when they were coming, there was only a One Muncie. Now they took on South Side blood, and they took on North Side blood. At being a Muncie Central Bearcat, but being a youth pastor for over 25 years, I had kids in my youth group who went to North Side. I had kids in my youth group who went to South Side. So I would go to the South Side. I had to wear red. I had to wear the blue. And so I would go to games when I got on the school, but I'd go to South Side and wear a South Side hat. And then some of the people said, the guys I used to play against South Side said, don't that hat fit tight on your head? You don't look right in that. So, but the thing is, it is one community. It is a One Muncie now. And the thing is how we embrace it. That's the bottom line, how we embrace it. And I kept hearing people say, I talked to a lot of people, like I said, a lot of the guys I played football and baseball against at Muncie Southside, and we were talking about when we was going through the town hall meetings. And they would say, Michael, it's inevitable. We know it's going to happen. Sure. So they said, if we prolong it a year or two, some people said, just wait 1 more year, 2 more years, let's wait, and let's see. They said, it's inevitable that's going to happen. And so you just said it'd be difficult for me to put on purple, but so I think it's bringing our community back. That the theme of One Muncie is a positive theme. The bands help that, and so I think we just go on. But it's more than just bands and athletics, which is the highlight of One Muncie, when winning championships. Right. But I think the academics that we can afford them and to see them go. My goal is always that from kindergarten on, that we prepare every child to go to college. Now, we have some board members saying every child's not going to college. Right. But they didn't hear what I said. I said prepare every child to go to college. That they're prepared to go to college, whether they choose a career, a trade, whether they choose to go to the military, at least they're prepared, because there are people now that they're not taking the military because they're just not prepared. There's kids in the trades, they can't get it. So, but I think the theme One Muncie, and it's gonna take some time. The kids buy into it. The thing they would say is the kids will buy into it quicker than their parents. Especially if you went to Southside and the kids will buy into it. And they say, well, it's easy for you to say you went to Central. Well, if we chose to go to South, it wouldn't bother me because it was inevitable that something had to happen.
I want you to think back, you're the one person I can ask this, on your entire life in Muncie. Do you think that over time, the Muncie schools have worked effectively with the African American community?
That's an interesting question. Worked effectively?
Yeah.
I think we got a long way to go. I think I was thinking about this on the camera, and I had conversation with people in the past. The Muncie community is fragmented, divided. I know the south side of town gets a lot of bad press. It's down the south side of town. Well, I grew up in a community that got a lot of bad press. The Wiley area. You don't want to go to Wiley. You don't want to do this. We deal with the emergent learning students. That emergent learning students at Ball State that come to that are actually housed in the Beauty Center. And so for the past 6 years, my wife and I we mentored kids and showed them around the Wiley area and showed them how important it is. And so they said they heard, well, you don't want to go in the Wiley area, that's bad. So, but overall, I think that we have work to do, because I think if you draw a line Willing Street, up here and then go McGalliard, a lot of times people stay on those sides, and if you're on that side, you have no identity within in the city. So you can take Willing and go downtown and never interact with the African American communities. You can come back up Willing and go down McGarry, go to the mall, never interact. Mm-hmm. So I think and to say that there's no interaction, people say, well, now you're playing the race card. Well, I think people don't understand that it's very real that we have to interact. When we look at our one of the things that I'm really adamant about is that we reflect our student population in our schools. We don't do that. The last report we had 520 teachers. We had 20 African American teachers. That's about 0.3%. We have about 22 to 26% of African American students in our classroom, our school. That doesn't reflect. I think we need to do more recruiting. I think, and a lot of times. But then on the other hand, if there's nothing going on, then the African American community doesn't come and necessarily support either. If we say, okay, we're going to close school on Martin Luther King Day, then the school board meeting will be full. It's just not African American. If the issue doesn't fit me, then I'm not worried about it. If we never said we were going to close Southside, then we probably wouldn't have heard from the south side of town. It's just a matter of that. I think there's more work, but I think that the key word is that you have to be intentional. I don't think we're always intentional. I've shared that with Mr. Heller. I've shared that with others. I think we need to be more intentional. I think we need to represent more in our classrooms. And they said, well, our enrollment up, our percentage is up with African Americans, but the majority of them are custodians who work in the night shift. Well, our kids not seeing them. You know what I'm saying? So there's much work to do, but it's not just one way. I think there's some things that the African American community need to come. Sometimes we come for a fight, because there's some injustice and we need to correct injustice. Well, what if there's no injustice? And we still need to be on board to say, okay, how can we better our schools? So a lot of times people just come because there's injustices happening and they want to rectify the injustices. Instead of saying there's no injustice, well, they think everything's fine. Well, let's come together then and say, okay, what's going on? How are we doing? How many, and so those are numbers that I know, that I see, other board members not see, and I don't, and I see them because I'm an African American male. I see that. Right. There's more work to be done, but it's on both sides. It's just not one side. But you let some injustices happen, and then people will come, and people generally do that. Our nation is like that. If everything's nothing going on, if it doesn't affect me, then I'm not getting involved. And so I don't know, but there's more work to be done. There's more work to be done. I would like to see greater representation of teachers in our classrooms across the board, and Ball State might not be producing it, but somebody's producing it. But then you got to look on this side with those. If you're sitting at a table getting interviewed, and I'm from Muncie Community Schools in Muncie, and Friday was rainy and cold, on the 31st of October, and I offer you a job at $26,000, but then somebody from Atlanta, Georgia, or Florida will offer you a job and say, come down here and we're going to give you moving expenses and all that kind of stuff. What are you going to take?
Which does happen.
Which does happen a lot. Yeah. And so those numbers, the 520 to 20, some of those are very real, because I talked to an individual who was a teacher in the Muncie Community Schools, African American, and he was a principal or administrator in Muncie Community Schools. He said him and his roommate was Caucasian, and they were both teachers. And they went to the job fair at Ball State. And so the Caucasian guy came out and said he had 3 interviews, and the African American had 15, 12 or 15. He had Muncie and stuff, but all of his was Atlanta. So the need is greater. People want them, but is Muncie attractive enough to hold them? That could be another thing.
That's a real challenge.
Yeah, it is.
Those are all the formal questions that I have, but at the end of all my interviews, I give the people I'm interviewing an opportunity to add anything that you might like
Okay.
to this.
Well, I think Muncie, the city of Muncie is a great place to live, great place to raise your kids. I think that we have a lot of challenges. I think we have a lot of challenges economically. I think there are still some challenges socially, racially in our community. I think the people of our community are working to get it better. But I think we need to be more proactive than reactive in our community. I think our superintendent has done a great job. I think our mayor has done a great job. I think people as a whole do a great job. But I'm just now meeting you. If I never, and so I've been in Muncie all my life. I'm 58 years old. I don't know how long you've been in Muncie, but
since the late 60s.
Okay, so we've never even met.
Right.
So there's still things, and I consider myself going a lot of places in the city. We've never met. So now you know a little bit about me. I know a little bit about you. But the thing is, if you stay in that perimeter, willing to McGuire to stay on that side, and I don't know how you could do that. I think every community is like that. There's in and of themselves. I think there are some things that what Ball State is doing with their immersive learning. There's some ways that you reach out. I drove a Chinese student around. He was interested in the Wiley area. He's an architect student, and just to hear his perspective of his family, both his parents are doctors, and he didn't want to be a doctor. They told him, you don't want to be. He's an architect. So he did 5 years in China, and now he's come to Muncie. And then he told me the perspective of we can only have one child. When I was born, they could only have one child. If somebody had 2, they had to give that child away to another parent so they could have. And that perspective, and to coming in, I went and showed him, took him around Wiley, showed him the churches, and how proud the African American community is, and church is a vital part of it, faith is a vital part of it. But I wish there was a way that we could be more inclusive in terms of getting to interact. If we never have to interact, we won't interact.
And you must really feel, I think, my background and yours being kind of similar as far as the pastorates, that the churches can play a really important role in this.
Yes, very much so. And especially the churches is, I put it, the church used to be everything, especially in the African American community. The pastor was the pastor, and he fed the people. As you see now, with people getting different views and people are moving, the church is quote unquote not as important to people anymore, especially in the African American church. When I went to church, we went to church. You had to go. Everybody went to church. However long. And there were kids when I was growing up said, when I get old enough, I'm not making my kids go to church. I'm not. And you see that bearing noise. But the church plays a very important role. The respect that the community used to have for pastors is not the same respect now as it was then. But the church plays a tremendous role, and that's one way that we can help blend some of those things, immerse some of the things. several years ago, I was on a group, and they had the Muncie Coalition called Pastor George Saunders, who was at First
Right.
Baptist, took that over. And we started doing some wonderful things with meetings and stuff that kind of dwindled away. So, but there were some things at Union Chapel and First Baptist,
Yeah.
and all these churches were coming together, and we were meeting, and I was meeting, you know, they had the youth pastors meeting together, and so we were learning each other, talking to each other, interacting in services together. That just brought Muncie together. That kind of went away. So some more of that would help. But if I got a beeline to this store and then go to this there and this, and I just stay in this little triangle and go back home, and your triangle is a different place, we'll never interact. You know, somehow we gotta, what is that Venn diagram? Somehow we gotta, you know, see the, you know, find the common and deal in that area. There's going to be some differences. There's places you go, I won't go. There's places I go, you won't go. But there are some common places
Sure.
that if we can get in that I guess it's the Venn diagram. If we
you're
get
right.
in that middle and start dealing in there, we'll find out, and then maybe that will increase some. You know what I'm saying? So,
I do. Well, thank you very much for participating in our project.
not a problem. I enjoyed it. All right, thank you.